Praise the Lord, brothers and sisters, and thank you very much for joining us in this video. We're very happy to have you with us, and we thank you for taking the time out to just spend a few moments of studying the Word of God with us. And so we're not going to prolong the time. We're going to get straight into our discussion and our consideration for today. And we're going to talk on the topic, seeing God. Okay, I think this is a very important topic, and I always say that because quite biasly I would say that. But I really want you to consider this topic with grave seriousness today, because we sometimes characterize God and we talk about God in ways that we assume comes from a perspective that is absolute. In other words, we would like to think we know everything that we need to know about God. But when we look at this text that we're going to look at in John chapter 1, verse number 18, we are reading from a premise that we must seriously take into consideration. The premise that we find here is that God is known, but when it is really investigated, it is discovered that God, just take the word God for a moment, not necessarily Jehovah, but God is a word and an idea and a being that is very hard to comprehend, okay? Being that we are humans and being that God, as grand as he is, as absolute and as immutable and as just different as he is, the truth of the matter, brothers and sisters, is that we and all of our innovation, all of our technology, all of our intellect, all of our studies, to understand and to comprehend God is something that is absolutely impossible unless we have Jesus Christ to declare him to us. Okay, I want you to see what John says about this in John chapter 1, verse number 18. He says, "No one has ever seen God, but the unique one," the King James Version says, "the only begotten Son, who is himself God, is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us." Now, before we go into discussions about any other thing, let's just set the table for this verse. The first thing we want to acknowledge is that the way John talks about God, it forces us to think about God in ways that are uniquely different to the way we are used to thinking about God. Okay? When we think about God, we often think about him in one or two ways. He's either this being that is stuck up in the sky, who we have a hard time relating to, we have a hard time communicating with, but somehow or another, Jesus has opened up the way so that we can hopefully, and that's an underlying word there, hopefully we can get through to him. And in times where we get through to him, we say, yes, it worked. And in times where we can't feel, or we don't feel like we get through to him, we say, well, he's too far. Maybe we need to try a little harder. That's one idea. The other idea is an idea that is so casual to where God is so abstract, but yet he is so personalized to where we feel like because he's so big and so grand, the best we can do is just make him whatever we want him to be. And so we make him our personal little God, kind of like in the old covenant, those household gods. They would become whatever the person would want them to be. And then we feel like by means of us personalizing God, we have come to an absolute understanding, which, by the way, may work for us, but never mind how it works out for the rest of the world. But when we look at this text, John paints a different picture. John is actually saying God has always been a part of the world. God has always been the sustainer and been involved in his creation. But something tricky has happened with humanity. Somehow or another, humanity has found themselves in the place where they can't really define, or even, should I say, comprehend God. As close as he is, as near as he is, as involved as he is incomprehensible. And here we find a very startling fact. Out of all that Moses did and all the interaction that Moses had with God, you know, the Bible talks about Moses seeing God face to face. But then on the other hand, it shows us that even Moses had a problem really comprehending and being able to understand God. And I want to put that big bubble in the air of God, just who he is and what he is and how do we even begin to comprehend God. Moses didn't quite get it as much as he could have been gotten. But then John shows us something that happened in the world that only could happen by that, as the New Living Translation says, that unique one. As the more conservative translations say, only the Son of God could do this. The Son of God has come into the world, who has been with the Father. Notice these relational terms, Son and Father, who is, by the way, God, both God, but the relationship shows us how God works. See how mind-boggling that is? And I want to just say this. God is not meant to be totally grasped. All right. As far as we go in our comprehension of God, just know that there is so much further that we could go. But it's not how far we can go. The objective of the believer, the objective of humanity, is to go to the very depths of where God intended for us to go, so that we can see him in all the many ways that he has desired for us to see him. Now, that is important. The first thing is this. We have to think deeply, and we have to think hard, and we have to discern what it means for God to be God. Okay, that's the first thing we have to do. This is why John says no one has ever seen God. Nobody has ever discerned God, completely been able to perceive him. But he doesn't stop there. He says, but, which means God intends for us to see him in a unique way. He intends for us to see a certain aspect of him. Though our finite ability may not be able to get all of him, God intends for us to see him. And I want us to understand this. It is our responsibility to crave more of God, to hunger and thirst after him, to seek him, to chase after him, to, as David said, to pant for him as a deer pants for the water brooks. It is our responsibility to want as much of God as we can have. And I'm going to be quite serious and quite honest, should I say. I am wondering whether or not the world is seeking and hungering and thirsting after God. More specifically, I'm wondering whether or not Christians are seeking and hungering after God. Because if that's not happening, then we eliminate any need and any necessity for Jesus Christ in our lives. I'm going to tell you why I say that. Because the moment we have a hunger and thirst for God is the moment we begin to say to ourselves, who can give us this ability to completely and totally, as much as possible, know God? In other words, who can help us quench this thirst, quench this hunger, quench this part of me that is missing, that I can only have filled by God himself? Well, it's not that we need to go any place any further into another realm to find them. It's rather we need to allow him who has been sent into the world to fill our absolute being, fill who we are, and allow ourselves to become a part of him and him a part of us. Which is why in verse number 18, he says, the unique one who is himself God is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us. This brings us to our second point. We have to allow Jesus to exegete God. In other words, Jesus is the one responsible for unveiling, or should we say unfolding, or giving us a clear look at who God is. If you look at what John is saying here, he's showing us not that Jesus brings God closer, but what Jesus does is he opens up our understanding of who God is, so that, brothers and sisters, when we see Jesus, when we really see Jesus, we ultimately see God. This is why Philip says, show us the Father and it will satisfy us. You ever thought about why does John include this in his writing? Show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. And then look at what Jesus says. Now, Jesus doesn't say, have you been so close to the Father? But he makes it personal. He makes a personal reference to himself, saying, have you been so long with me and you still have not seen me? Brothers and sisters, let me just say this to you. You can be in the church. You can be in the religious spectrum. You know, we can be around this thing a whole lot. But many of us can have the syndrome that Philip had, being around it, but not knowing who he is around. And that puts us in a very terrible position, if I can be quite honest, because to spend our lives around God, but not know who he is the greatest tragedy, because ultimately our responsibility becomes, as human beings, is living in conformity to who God really is, right? So Paul poses the idea that once we become cognitive to the fact that God wants us to be close to him, and once we become cognitive to the fact that God has allowed it so that Jesus can exegete the totality of God as far as he can be comprehended in the human mind and in the human heart and in the human being, then it becomes our responsibility, brothers and sisters, to live out and to completely live in that knowledge that comes from Jesus Christ. Now, there's something that happens. Paul tells us in Colossians chapter 3, verse number 10. He says, put on your new nature, all right, and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like him. He says you have to put on Jesus Christ, put on the new identity, the new person. That person that you were before, that person that you enjoyed being. Paul tells us that we have to put off of those earthly concerns, those earthly parts of our lives, and then put on the new nature, which is, by the way, made through Jesus Christ, made of Jesus Christ, that new man. And then when we do that, brothers and sisters, we are renewing ourselves. We are being renewed by that new nature that we're in, okay? And he says we begin to learn more about God, our Creator. So I want you to think about this. We are literally partaking in a sort of a spiritual journey where every single day, brothers and sisters, we are learning more, not only about God, but we're learning more about our new selves because we have put on a new nature. We're learning more about who we are ultimately becoming. And we're doing that because day by day, we're supposed to be knowing more and more about God. That is, becoming more intimate with him, having more of an understanding of who he is, what he likes, what he desires, what he is demanding from us. And by doing that, we are rediscovering not only God, but we're rediscovering ourselves. So, brothers and sisters, I want you to throw away the idea that once I became saved, everything that was supposed to happen to me, everything that was supposed to be known of God, finally I got it, and there's nothing else to be known, and then we just go on with life as usual. No, the moment you became cognitive of the existence, the real existence of God, and his closeness to his creation, that moment introduced you to a brand new life that says, I finally have the ability to walk with God day by day. And with walking with him, I discover new parts of my new identity that I have not had a chance to understand and comprehend before, because in the process of all of these things that are working in different ways, I am finding more about God. In other words, Jesus is continuously opening up and unfolding God to me. Brothers and sisters, when this sort of thing happens, you cannot help but to change and evolve into this image-bearing creature that brings more and more glory to God. Now, I talk about this because it becomes too easy to do what Israel did. Let me share with you what Israel did. Israel had all of these great ideas about God, had all these great ideas about what it meant to please God. They were busy with religious activity, going to the temple, offering sacrifices, discerning what it meant to please God. And they made the human mistake. They made the very easy mistake of thinking that they themselves could exegete God to themselves. So much to the point that when the one who could only exegete God came, they looked at him and said, never mind, we'll pay attention to what we've been doing all along. And I worry that service after service, every time we fall on our knees and pray, and maybe even times when we read our Bibles and we take it up and we try to comprehend everything, that all we're doing is we're sitting at a table, we're coming to an event where we're trying to exegete God to ourselves, when only Jesus himself can do that. This means something that we must do is absolutely imperative. We must look to the Word with the intention of seeing Jesus, so that we can do as Jesus said, when we see Jesus, we ultimately see the Father. I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to take it very seriously. I want you to take it personally. I want you to answer this question honestly. Have you really seen Jesus? Okay? I want you to think about that. I know you might have heard about him. I know you might have sung about him or read about him. But here's the really, really, really serious question. Have you seen Jesus? Have you perceived who he is? Have you gone past the earthly existence and seen, like the apostle said, you are the Son of the living God, and actually discern what that means? That when you see Jesus, you ultimately see the Father. And when you see the Father, you see the Creator. And when you see the Creator, you see God. And brothers and sisters, tell me, how does that all make sense? When we start with looking at a man and ultimately end up saying we see God, how does that make sense in our rationalistic mindset? We have to absolutely admit it doesn't make much rational sense, but it is a fact that by faith, when we read through this text, when we read through the proclamation of Jesus Christ, something connects with our spirit. Something comes into unity with what we've been searching for all of our lives, and something happens. We ultimately begin the journey of discovering more about this being who created all things and by his own power sustains heaven and earth, and it finally clicks. How can I explain that, brothers and sisters? I'm going to be completely honest with you. With words, I don't know how to explain it. All I can say is seek the Father, know him by Jesus Christ. This is why Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No man can come to the Father but by me. What is he saying? Is this a rationalistic argument? Is this a philosophical discourse? Not at all. What he is saying is there's something absolutely miraculous and supernatural about how God deals with humanity. And the only way to really grab hold of it is by getting it through me. And I just want us to venture into the life that says, Lord, I want more of you, which ultimately means we must say, I want more of Jesus. You can take this whole world. You know, there was a sister whenever we first moved to Sumter, she used to sing this song, I have decided to follow Jesus. And then this part in the song says, you can have this whole world, okay? You can have everything the world has to give me. Notice what Paul says in Colossians chapter 3, that we have to put off the earthly things of our lives. You can take everything the world wants to give me, but please just give me Jesus. What is this song communicating? That once we have Jesus, we have God. Why? Because Jesus is God, and he is sought to reveal himself in the personhood of Jesus Christ. This is an amazing thing. All I can say to you, I don't know how much more can be said to bear root or bear to the fact, should I say, that this is necessary. All I can say, like the apostle said, we've seen him for ourselves. Yes, there's a more reliable way. There's a more sure word of prophecy. But what we can say is we've seen him for ourselves. And all I can say to you at this point is seek God. Seek Jesus Christ. Seek that relationship that conforms and puts you on the journey to get more and more and more and more of him. And here's the amazing thing about it. The more you get, the more there is to be gotten. In other words, you can never say, I've ran out of anything that I can get. There's so much to God that he wants us to have. And the more we seek him, the more we can have. So brothers and sisters, I want to invite you to put off the things that are concerned with your worldly life. There's no good in all of that. There's a new way of living. There's a new way to live and to embrace life, and that is through Jesus Christ. I pray that we will find God. We will discover who he is. We will allow Jesus to exegete him to us. That is, unveil him, unfold him, so that we can have that pure and life-changing, that transforming connection with the Father. Brothers and sisters, I thank God for you. I hope all of this was encouraging and inspiring and was provoking more than anything, that we might enter and continue down that road that will lead us into the complete knowledge and understanding of God. As grand as that is, it is absolutely possible because Jesus has made it so. So brothers and sisters, I thank God for you. I'm continuously praying for you. I'm praying that we all come together again in fellowship. And boy, when we do, what a time we will have. All right. But until then, let's continue to be prayerful. Let's continue to be spiritual. Let's continue to seek God. And let's continue to be the light in the world of darkness. Until next time, God bless. And we'll see you soon.